Perspectives, Finding Common Ground, a podcast series that brings together a panel of thought leader perspectives as a forum to socialize and problem solve education technology issues with the goal to ultimately find common ground.
My name is Patrick Devaney. I'm pleased to welcome you to this episode of Perspectives, Finding Common Ground today. Today we're going to talk about interoperability in the edtech space and potential role of philanthropy in that interoperability. And we've got three wonderful guests. I'd like to give them the chance to introduce themselves and start with a little bit about their perspective on the topic. I guess we will start with Sean. Sean?
Thank you, Patrick. Appreciate it. Glad to be here. Sean Casey from the EdFi Alliance. And we're a part of the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation, focused on solving data interoperability for the K-12 field in the US. And really, we're trying to tackle fundamental problems that exist across the market that really get in the way of learners getting the full benefit and value out of all the edtech systems that get implemented as point solutions for the things that they need, and that get in the way of product providers trying to take those great products to market in a very repeatable way, right? And so we're trying to tackle those fundamental underlying problems such that the data can be unlocked and used across systems, so you get a really full 360 on learners of current information about where they're successful, where they might be struggling, where an intervention might be needed, which interventions are making a difference, all of those kinds of key essential questions that school districts and school systems have. Prior to EdFi, I worked as a teacher 100 years ago and as a school district CIO and district administrator and on the vendor side as well. And so it kind of worked this problem from a number of angles. But to me, the payoff is we invest all this time and money in EdTech products and implementations of them, and in our time in using them, our instructional time, especially for students and teachers to use those tools. I feel like if we crack this problem, this is the capstone of all of those efforts. And so that's kind of the why for me in this work, but it's also the mission that the EdFi Alliance has with the community that we serve of state education agencies and local education agencies and vendors and such. Thanks for being here.
Fantastic, Sean. We're glad to have you, and I'm sure your perspectives are going to be a great contribution here. Next, I'll go around the horn for as I see everybody. Jason, maybe you can go next.
Thanks, Patrick. Appreciate being on the show today. So Jason Wilmot, I lead Canva's education team. So Canva is a digital design software globally used by over 80 million students and teachers. I think we've got about 13,000 districts or so onboarded to Canva within the last 4 years. So excited to share. And I've been in EdTech for 20 plus years, Microsoft prior to Canva. And personally, I'm a high school football coach, and that's my passion. So I like to say I teach as I coach. Really, it's been a fun ride for the last 15 years coaching as well. But when I look at the state of interoperability in the edtech sector, like it's showing progress, but it still remains fragmented, as Sean stated. Some strides are being made with common standards. Many schools and vendors like ourselves, like we actually struggle with integrating all these tools seamlessly. Whether it's data formats, adherence to universal standards, limited collaboration between vendors. Like if I were a school, I would find it extremely difficult to understand where to start, how to integrate them without a ton of manual work, which puts undue cost and pressure on employees that the school districts just don't have. So I think once again, like while myself as a vendor with Canva, like we are facing challenges because, we do have proprietary technology that we want to keep in place, but we also want to make sure it opens up to the masses. So I'm excited to be here today and talk a little bit, and hopefully we can find some common perspectives on it.
Fantastic. Welcome, Jason. And last but not least, Jeff, can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, cool. Thank you, Patrick. After hearing the introductions, I'm super excited to have this conversation today, even more so than when I came in. My name is Jeff Huteman. I work, Casey's been, he was a teacher 100 years ago. We're even older than Casey. A 100-year-old publisher. We are the largest provider of K-12 curriculum in the United States. And I manage interoperability for our digital platforms that deliver the digital version of our curricular experience. And so that's Ed, Read 180, Math 180, Waggle, Writable. We recently acquired the assessment provider NWEA, and we're working on interoperability between those two companies, by the way. So I have capital I interoperability. I have small I interoperability. I have even smaller I interoperability when we think about services that we build to support things like these connective standards. So we're deep into LTI. We have a lot of high hopes for that standard. We want to see it leveraged. We've got high hopes for EdFi. We would love to be able to have a campfire that we can rally around and be low cost, easy to build into our plans and interoperate in that way. But Coach Wilmot tells me as well is absolutely true. Is a fragmented space it's difficult to just in the SIS space. Think about how fragmented that space is. And some of our customers have on-prem versions, even in some instances, of these things. So, it's as a function of this time moving forward, innovation happening, the space has become fragmented and a lot of providers and players. But so I'm not a teacher, I'm a technologist. So I look at it as it's a channel for me to deliver my products. You were talking about higher ed when I came here. I look at this like door. This is a channel I have to project through somehow, some way. So we looking for the smallest, fastest way to do that. And that's my job. So that's me.
Cool. Well, welcome all of you. And we kind of touched on some of this, but I think a neat way to start this discussion is let's kind of define interoperability because there are kind of multiple layers to this. And what are the things that you view as interoperability and what do you think is working and not working today in terms of those requirements? And I'm going to throw the ball up in the air to use the sports analogies. It's not necessarily a football. That's more of a basketball, but balls in the air. Who wants to start?
I can jump in just with a point of view on this, but I'd be super interested to hear Jeff and Jason's too. The part that we tackle at EdFi and in the EdFi community, importantly, it's not just an organization that is driving things centrally. It's really distributed, right? It's this great big community of LEAs and SE, like I mentioned a minute ago, and all the folks that support them, including their product providers that are engaged in this work. And it's around data interoperability in our case, which means we need a way to describe data that is coming from different source systems. And they are authoritative for certain kinds of data. And maybe they read other data, or maybe they can be enriched by other sources of data if it can be exchanged securely and in real time or close to real time. And in a way that's apples to apples, right? That's where the descriptive part of the data standard comes in. There are lots of other kinds of interoperability too that are also solving worthy problems, right? Like point-to-point tools interoperability. I think, Jason, you mentioned LTI a minute ago, and that's more like content interoperability, right? There's a lot of different interoperability dimensions, I guess, to focus on that are worthy problems to solve. Because at the end of the day, if I go back to my school district days, especially in the CIO role, we implemented a whole lot of technologies. We got good at it. It was kind of a badge of honor for us. But I started to realize after a bit, I might have created another problem because now we have all of these point solutions and there's a lot of them and they solved the initial problem that we chose them for. But then they created another problem of complexity for our end users. And those folks, if you're talking about a classroom teacher, if you're talking about a counselor, a principal, an assistant principal, many of those folks that might be personas that Jeff and Jason sell to or support or try to equip in your software tools, they don't have time to knit this stuff together. Whichever part of the interoperability problem that we're talking about solving, they don't have the time to do that, nor maybe the expertise, or they could, but they tend to have a lot of things on their plate and a lot of priorities. At the end of the day, if we can make the technology work in a way that is what they expect, which is like, can it just work for me? Can it just be current and updated? Can it connect to the other things that make sense for it to? Then their time can actually be spent with students. And that is one of the big payoffs, right? So our part of that was a little bit of a long answer, but our part of it that we focus on specifically at EdFi is the data interoperability part, that apples to apples exchange in real time across source systems.
That data definition is a difficult piece. So I got to think about what I would consider a grade and what someone else would consider a grade when they send from their system. What I would consider an interaction, a meaningful those the kind of data that our customers are interested in. And by the way, we're interested too, for these high levels of interoperability to create those insights you were talking about. Can I intervene? We have, huge portion of our business are supplemental interventionary products. So being able to interact is but it's so difficult. It is so difficult. And I got to point out, the role, I've only been in this market for 2 years, but the role of someone like a ClassLink, not to pander, but it's helpful to us,
Yeah.
that a rallying point where we can say, okay, they've been able to winnow down the market from this really fragmented space into these kind of few providers that are providing this sort of intermediary service. It allowed us. And so we've actually pushed, as Patrick, tried to push your solution into places because it allows for the rallying cry and the similarity of data, but you can only reach so far too. And then, of course, you have the problems of commercial access. Jason, like I'm sure you have, how many licenses, who's consuming, how are the groups divided, who gets what, and that's associated with just commercial distribution. So it's a multifaceted arena. And I don't think people really understand like that interoperability has so many different components that are super important, and they retreat and advance, at different times. And there's another question you wrote in the previous is like, the unseen cost of delivering what we intend to deliver. When it was books for us at HMH, we still have robust book business. Shipping books is a well-known, well-understood thing. It's a repeatable process. All I need to know is your address. And that's the, that's the channel my curriculum flows through. But now I have this whole new channel. And it's trucks here, it's motorcycles there. I can't even come up with an analogy, it's just, we find a way.
Yeah. I mean, and I think, Patrick, from a vendor perspective, like our goal is looking at the teacher and student. Can they access the tool very easily? Are they rostered in their right classroom? And then, from an API perspective, Canva has a lot of third-party apps that add value to our solution for the teachers and students. Can they access that in Canva, right? And ultimately, when you think about that, like the teacher and the student, as Sean said, like they don't care. If it breaks somewhere in the process, they don't get to use the tool. And then obviously we know what a 30-minute class looks like when the teacher had a great plan to use the tool and you can't access the tool. And so for us, it's really thinking about how do they log into the tool? How do they access the tool? How are they rostered into the tools? And then from there, like what additional APIs are we adding value that they want to integrate with? So I just came back from VET in London and saw, 100 new apps, right? And we'll go to ISTE in June and there'll be 100 new apps that are, and so what does that look like for the teacher and student is what's always top of mind for me. Cause there's been articles, Sean probably has better data than I do on this, but like a typical school teacher has access to 500 apps, right? I don't know the exact number, but like, what do I use? How do I use it? If they don't talk to each other, they're really pointed and then it becomes a lot of manual work. So.
Well, and what's fascinating about this is any one of these exchanges seems pretty simple, seems pretty rudimentary, and it's just a grade to use Jeff's example. Yet when you put them in total, they are incredibly complex.
Yep.
And it seems that they're incredibly expensive to facilitate this. There's a cost here. And it's interesting, especially with you here, Jason, as your product is part of a philanthropic effort to get content into educators' hands to help the students and the teachers. The cost associated with interoperability, how transparent is the world to that? How do people understand it? Or is it all back office kind of stuff?
I would say the industry's transparency around this varies significantly. There are some vendors who are upfront about everything and the investment required for integration, and whether it be your API or using LTI, there's additional cost to that. But others just obscure the cost, right? And it's built into their pricing model. There's not good or bad. It's just what we're seeing. And so for me, right, like I would love to see more transparency around both direct costs associated with it as a vendor. Like it's okay that there's cost to it. But then what are the long-term benefits of it, right? And how can we be transparent and facilitate some of these standardized practices, documentation, independent reviews? Like for me, that's what I would love to see because it helps us. Now we are 100% free in the market, but I'm not against folks charging to cover their costs. It's then again, once again, how can we show that here's the value, here's the documentation, here's why we did this, and more independent reviews. And I work for a global company, which makes it even harder, right? Like in the US, there is one. Okay, LTI, believe it or not, when you step out of the US and work with large ministries of education, sometimes they're like, oh, LTI is now this. And it's like, wait a minute, you just took the standard and made it something else. You made it really hard. So for what reason? I don't know. Maybe we can talk about it, but I think there's just I would love to see more transparency around it as a collective group, because I do think every company is here for the right reasons. You didn't build an education app to make the most money. If you wanted most money, you probably would have built an enterprise app. You do care about teachers and students, but you do need to monetize and for your costs. I get that.
As you say that, the unique challenge we have with that is that we're not a software as a service company.
Yeah.
So we haven't been. We are now effectively, but we haven't trained our sales force at all to talk about this, when we haven't, explained that. And by the way, to be just a little bloodthirsty about it, it's a way for us to generate revenue too. Like we do ourselves this favor. We don't even build it into our models in some instances because, the margins and the way that our market works have been so comfortable in the past. But as we change to digital, you just have to be upfront about these things. And we were talking about it today when, why wouldn't we approach this customer? If we're going to do something extraordinarily custom for them, and in this regard, why wouldn't we be upfront about that cost? And then if you take that concept further, then we should be upfront about it at all costs. When we say we're delivering this platform, understand that this comes at a service. We get all the QA and dev and all that kind of stuff, but the interoperability too. That's what you're buying essentially. So we got to be upfront about that cost, but it's a mindset shift for the 162-year-old publisher in a big way. And it's not always technology, right? It's about this sales teams being able to describe this as well and us getting them confident in that scenario. That's interesting.
And Patrick, I was thinking kind of a devil's advocate response to this question is, if we aren't transparent about what it takes to do this, to do it well and support it and have these capabilities baked into products, then we are perpetuating the other kinds of costs that districts are dealing with and struggling with today. Because I guarantee you, like I'll go back to my district experience again before Ed5, but I've seen it many times in all the districts I work with around the country now, is that any system that you buy and implement and put in that is some sort of a silo that is not integrated or interoperable takes slices of people's time, like database administrators or system administrators, or sometimes teachers actually rostering and doing things themselves. And those costs are often invisible in school districts. You know what I mean? They're often just things that happen in the course of a school day and not necessarily measured or well understood. But if you actually take the time to look at that from a systems point of view, from a school district, those are real dollars. Those are real costs. So guess what? Like the costs are being borne one way or another. It's just that what Jason and Jeff were advocating for is this clarity and transparency about, hey, let's do this in an enterprise grade way and we'll support it and you'll have an SLA and we'll keep it current and updated. I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but like you're talking about productizing it and really making it robust and something that those customers can count on. And that is a giant reliever of workloads and burdens on those school systems. And again, letting them get back to the prime thing, which is student support, right? Getting the most out of those 180 school days that they have with their students each year.
Right. Well, and the efficiency gain is important because in education, we essentially have a capped revenue stream opportunity. There's only so much money and it's all coming through the schools in essence, right? If you're in this market. So how do we optimize that? Transparency is important for today's operation. I think it's also really important for evolution and decisions about going forward. Because kind of the underlying statement here is we need that. We can start someplace, but then what do we do next? And you have to have insight into it.
Can I tell you, Patrick, like one thing, I'm going to have an honest confessional here. Old Irish Catholic kid, right?
Great.
Time for the confession. Something that we need to do a better job of, and we're trying to, and would love to do that with partners like the ones on the call here and others, is we need to shine a light on the ROI of incorporating data interoperability and data standards into your products. Because until we connect those dots with our product providing vendors, until we do that, it's just going to look like either an add onto a busy roadmap or something that pulls them away from other important features on a roadmap or something else. We have to get good at unearthing and connecting those dots of why, like, what's the business case for this? Does it reduce costs? Does it allow me to gain more customers or retain customers? Does it mitigate risks? Because now I'm tying product use cases to community defined best practices. that are repeatable and consistent and convergent, right? Like, so that's a thing that we're trying very hard to get better at EdFi. There's work to be done, but I think we're starting to unlock some of that with providers such as ACT is a great example of one of our really big partners in the EdFi community that has really adopted the data model internally, like sort of like the schema for assessment data, but also the API-based data exchange mechanisms for delivering results as soon as they're fresh, so that when they're at their most valuable, they're accessible for folks that want to make use of them to support students right now that you have in the classroom today. And I think I think we're kind of on the maybe at the beginning stages of being able to tell these stories better, but like it's an important job to be done because otherwise we'll always just be chasing the market and trying to do some sort of a cleanup operation on standardizing the proliferation that already happened.
So Sean, I think it's a really important point. And I think especially when you're talking ROI, we have to talk standards. And I think it's a fascinating opportunity to have the EdFi Alliance involved in building standards. And it's a really unique way for contributions to be made to the efficiency of the market. When you're talking about the benefits of standards and the benefits in terms of the cost, share a little bit more about the thought behind the EdFi philosophy and why the EdFi Alliance is leaning into the standard and bringing that to the education market.
So education is a core part of the mission of the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation, just period, end of sentence, right? That is one of the sectors that the foundation is aimed at improving opportunities and serving up more opportunities especially for the underserved, but really just for all learners. And the reason that EdFi came to be as a data standard and as this community initiative is because in working with educational agencies, the foundation discovered, hey, there are some fundamental problems that we're running into in trying to make use of data to impact learners. Isn't this being solved somewhere else or by someone else? And it wasn't. So really, like the EdFi Alliance came to be as a portfolio of the foundation to do what the market couldn't or wouldn't do on its own. And so the influx of philanthropic dollars to unstick or to influence or to incentivize behaviors towards a more rational and defragmented ecosystem and market is really the fundamental nature of what EdFi is trying to accomplish there. We won't do that without partners. We won't do that without partners like an ACT or an HMH or a Canva or a ClassLink or you name it, right? Student information system vendors and assessment vendors. There's a lot of different types of really important schools source systems that school systems use. And so the idea is really to link arms with those kinds of providers in order to bring those capabilities to market in a robust way for customers to benefit from. And so we've made good headway. You know, there's 15 states that have implemented EdFi statewide now. There's about a quarter of the districts in the United States that are utilizing EdFi, either as a part of one of those statewide initiatives or through educational service agencies like hub and spoke type models that serve lots of districts. But these channels of going through folks that have scale, like a state education agency or like a managed service provider or like a big provider, like an HMH NWEA, for example, that is how we will reach districts and reach them in a timely way so that there's not a really long tail of folks that are waiting to get the benefits of this because they can't do it themselves.
Yeah. It's such a chicken and egg problem too. It is the way to force it is going to have to be for it to be appearing in RFPs from the state. You know, we see LTI in RFPs all the time. In fact, another one today, and we have to lean into it. And it goes all up and down from cartridges to QTI question standards to all those things. So that's a forcing mechanism for my market. Because otherwise, the market works in the other direction where you want to have your secret sauce and you want to be differentiated from everybody and you can only come to us to get our particular brand of educational insight. You know, the market forces push you in that direction. So we keep hoping we have high hope for standards like these that they start appearing in there. And so what would the playbook for LTI to get into that position? And can we run that play again somehow, some way? And because we've seen it, people request it, If it's in a RFP for someplace in Texas, it will get built here.
Mhm.
And Jeff, that's a great point. I mean, I think like all of us education vendors are looking at RFPs. So if they do make it a requirement, we will build it. And I think that is a super important point to whoever's listening. Like we do, all of us are scanning the RFPs within our relative market. And if it's required, LTI, one roster, except whenever it might be, like we're going to adapt to that to ensure that we have a chance of participating in that RFP. So I love that point of seeing it in RFPs because I think it's school district leaders and sometimes forget about it. It's like, no, if you do put it in there, we will adopt to it. So,
And
love
the
that.
frustrating thing about it is we've done far more for far less important things in an RFP, like if you could have put
Absolutely.
Anybody have examples of interoperability that are positive examples or negative for that matter? And they don't have to be specific with the actual parties, but what functionality has it enabled? What benefit has it brought to students and teachers in the classroom?
So I'll go first here. I will not mention the name, but what I wanted to bring up is it is an incredibly large school district. I'll just leave it at that. And we all know that population shifts every day. Who's a student here? Who's a student there? Think about the number of students in a very large district whose parents get married and a name change is working its way through the SIS system. How many instructors are hired, fired, interns, assistant teachers who need access to these solutions, substitute teachers, and in a moment of time, particularly ours, that very proud of how we were able to handle that. Now it requires a deep partnership with the client, but I was really pleased with how we did that successfully at that scale with that. All the dynamics going on, all the bureaucracy that comes with that. I mean, all the overhead we're all familiar with.
From my perspective, right, and we've been talking about LTI, learning tools, interoperability. It's an open standard. It's by IMS Global, the Learning Consortium. And I think once again, the key elements to success here was a strong commitment to open standards, collaboration amongst not only customers, vendors, a gigantic ecosystem getting behind it, whether it's districts writing it within their RFP, vendors adopting it. And then there's documentation and implementation around this. And I think we need more of that, right? That's just one component. But I think, that component simplifies login, simplifies roster. It reduces the administration burden. It's a win-win for everybody in the party. So that would be one that I know we've been chatting about, but I think IMS Global has done a nice job of building around the ecosystem and getting feedback. So it's been really helpful for us here at CAM.
Patrick, I think one that I would highlight and name, it's such a great story and they lead in the field and kind of share their playbook often is the Michigan Data Hub. The reason I'm going to mention them is because the good thing and the bad thing about working in a community is you learn what works and you learn what didn't, right? And so this is a learning enterprise. This work is difficult work, right? It is undoing entrenched things that have been almost like institutionalized through workarounds and other legacy kinds of processes for some time. So this interoperability work is not for the faint of heart. We are trying to make it easier and we are trying to partner with the folks that can make it easier, but it's heavy lifting, no doubt. And one of the success stories that has come out and a successful pattern that has come out is the importance of a statewide, like integrated data ecosystem where you use educational service agencies to be technical centers or partners for their districts so that you reduce the burdens and the workloads on districts, but coordinate so that statewide you can actually link up with policies that are important in that state and maybe that are funded in that state. And so Michigan is the shining example where they now have about 100% participation of the districts in their state, which is close to 900. I think it's like 873 districts there. It's about 1.7 million kids. All of those districts are participating in this great big collaboration, which is like a hub and spoke kind of model with that ESA, the ESAs as the hubs and the districts as the spokes. The Michigan Data Hub now has built such a product catalog of integrations of data interoperable solutions. And actually, Jason and Jeff, you might be some of the participants in that product catalog. I wouldn't be surprised if HMH tools and Canva tools are in there. It's growing across a whole bunch of different categories of ed tech systems. But the idea here is it's not just an implementation per district or something along those lines. It may have started that way. Now it's very use case focused, where it's like early reading initiatives, college career and military readiness initiatives, multiple measures of assessment and benchmarking progress and student growth throughout the year, like all different kinds of use cases that are directed at student impact, funded by the state. And now they're at the point where they're at about 12 API connections per district of real-time live data flowing across these multiple systems and saving something like $41 million per year in their ROI studies of comparing what it used to cost them before they had those integration capabilities. Works out to be something like $25 per student per year, right? In cost savings and efficiencies. So like they are a great example of somebody who is telling that ROI story, doing the work to tell the ROI story, having a great sort of pre and post or before and after the data interoperability initiative story. But those are just reasons to buy into it and follow the pattern. The true kind of impact is the way that they're serving all of those kids, right? 1.7 million kids across all of those shapes and sizes of districts in that state in this highly sustainable and growing kind of rich catalog of use case based solutions is a powerful story. And we've got a number of states that are following suit, maybe not as mature and as far along, but they're getting there. South Carolina and Texas are a couple of other great examples. And so the good and the bad news I was telling you about, like what doesn't work and what does, we have learned some hard lessons along the way, like do it yourself district initiatives are pretty hard to sustain because things like superintendent turnover happen or pandemics occur or fill in the blank thing that happens that are disruptive. But when you have these scalable kind of structured statewide approaches like that with partners that come in and plug in products that are interoperable, it becomes highly valuable, very sticky, super useful, and it just gets richer and richer. That's the pattern that we are double down on supporting because we see so much value coming from it.
So clearly there's value because all three of you have come up with examples of how this is beneficial, right? And I even failed attempts to use for interoperability and using open standards. I happen to have one that I was personally involved in, and that's in Bloom, that goes back a number of years. It failed miserably by most accounts. However, if not for in Bloom, I don't think we would have the pressure or the adoption of interoperability that we have today. Do any of you have guidance for organizations? Because my impression of this is, in order to get really creative and make new things, you often are going outside of the open standard. However, to make something sustainable, you really want to be inside the open standard so that you can pile on and get the multiple benefits that Sean's describing from Michigan. How do we do that? How do we build a business model that marries those two? And that's not a question that's an easy answer, but I'd love to hear your perspective on it.
Yeah, it's interesting. And, coming from 20 plus years in the ed tech industry, seeing lots of different pricing models and everything else. And, I always instruct customers, right? There's multiple fees you're going to pay. You're going to pay a licensing fee, right? Like, there's a fee for that. You're probably going to pay a staff and training fee of training on the solution. You're going to pay a team of technical support, whether it's in-house or third party or at the state level. And so when you think about that construct, what struck me with Sean's example is like, they are taking some of those elements, potentially staff training, the technical support, out of the district hands and saying, okay, you want it. Maybe it's just the license fee you have to pay for at the district. And so like from my perspective, it is thinking about the larger construct of what it's going to take to deploy an ed tech solution to your teachers. Because if you don't think about all the potential costs, number one, you're going to spend some money and not deploy anything, and you're going to have limited value and success, which I've seen over my 20 years over and over again. Or you're going to adopt these non-interoperable systems, and it's going to benefit some who really take the time and manual work effort to use it. And then the masses, it's not going to benefit. And you're going to lose that instructional time. It's going to be extremely inefficient data management. And when the new superintendent comes in and says, let's assess this tool, you're going to be like, I don't, what are you talking about? I use it. It's great. But can you assess it? Is it impactful? How many people are using it? You may not be able to show that. So I think just once again, working with your vendors on saying, okay, what does it cost? The entire part of it. And then looking with your internal team and saying, how much is this going to take to support? That's things that we should all start doing and being more proactive.
It's a tough nut to crack. It's not the sexiest thing to market in the world. But especially when you're talking about, the ability, because what the district is ultimately looking for, at least from us, is outcomes.
Right.
So we need to be able to demonstrate that when we use the intervention product, we went up by 2% in terms of, our levels or whatever their particular metric is. And that's another thing, Sean, what is growth? How do you describe that? What's
Right.
It's a complicated thing. So ultimately the market imperative for us is to get across the idea of how we can improve the children's lives in your district educationally through our curriculum. That's something that's a core. How do I reserve time in that conversation to talk about what I am as a software as a service company? Because when we're selling at the school level, we're winning hearts and minds there amongst the teaching. The vast majority of our users are non-technologists by any stretch of the imagination. It is a tough nut to crack, but what we're trying to creep into is when it becomes custom, then we have a line item for it. And we can build it into the cost of operations. We can still do that because all of our solutions have some form of print that comes with it still to this day. So as long as that's around, it's cost of doing business. And like I said, it's difficult to find time in that conversation for, but we're getting better when a big customer is requesting something, and customers are becoming more sophisticated too. They're not shocked by this cost. It's like, oh, okay, yes, okay, you interoperate too. I played an interoperation cost with our SIS provider. Those folks are software as a service, and so they're getting a taste of what software as a service looks like. It's how do we map it into our particular conversation about curriculum. So it's tough for us because we can't live with it.
I love both of your sets of comments though, because like drawing a thread between them, you're talking about how data is an asset. Data has value if it's actionable, and if you can put it to work to solve a problem or answer an essential question, it has value. And I think Jeff, you said something that I firmly believe, which is we're talking about technical parts of this work, at least in part of this conversation. And it's not even really about that. It's a means, but the end that it's the means to is transparency into learning outcomes. What is actually making a difference? Like the scarce thing is time, instructional time, right? And so we're spending time on these tools and in these techniques or pedagogies or what have you with students and with teachers and as school systems trying to implement these kinds of things with fidelity, which Jason talked a lot about too. And you want to know, is it paying off, or for whom is it paying off, or what adjustments might we want or need to make, right? And to do that, you've got to have that kind of that holistic set of data that's flowing, that gives you multiple measures on your students in some kind of real time so that you can act on it when it's timely, right? And I think it's all about that. I think it's all about that transparency into outcomes. And if we can crack the code on the value of data as an asset and get out of this system or that system kind of religious war of like, proprietary or standards based, or Patrick, that you sort of started the question off with, sometimes you have to do expedient things to start or launch a thing, prove it, but then you want to like have the scalable thing that allows you to grow and expand, right? And oftentimes that's where standards come in. I think the like unifying thought there for me anyway is, you talk about the value of data as an asset because it gives you the insight you need to take action at the right time for the right kids in the right ways to drive those outcomes that Jeff alluded to.
So this is a fascinating conversation. I love it. I could have this all afternoon. I guess I'm a geek, but
Us like 10 other people on the planet, right?
Exactly.
So one of the real challenges here is we are capitalists and we think that our market is pretty efficient and it'll get there on its own. But if you had a thing to ask of educational leaders or policymakers, what would you ask to help accelerate that efficiency gain and that strive towards better ecosystem with a quicker path to the value, as Sean said?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I would ask is, I mean, obviously continue to advocate for open standards, whether it be, in the technology and your procurement policies, but incentivize collaboration amongst us vendors. It's okay, right? Like we actually do want to work with other folks, and everything's not a competition, a one-to-one. And so I think if we could establish some regular, and I think you guys do a great job of it, Patrick, of like, hey, we're going to bring together multiple people that may not have talked together, and we're going to try to solve this, right? What are the guidelines? What's the supporting research behind it? What does the effective implementation look like? Sean, I'm going to go look at Michigan the minute I get off this call. And I think that's wonderful, right? And then encouraging this public-private partnerships, right? Like we have to share. Yes, it's a capitalist environment. I get it. But the more we can share, the better we will all be off in teaching these students and teachers and driving to learning outcomes. So that'd be my one ask, is like, encourage us to get in the room together.
Oh, I will say I don't know that I can ask things of the government, but if you recognize the good work of philanthropic efforts of great citizens like Bill and Linda Gates or the Dells, you said, you did a great job. You took this standard Ed-Fi, we'll take it from here. We'll make it the national standard for educational interoperability. Not something that any politician's going to run on, but if they did that and they acknowledge that would be such great help to somebody like me. And then it appears in every RFP. And then there's the shot of, when Maria Gutierrez leaves this school and goes to this whole other school on the other side of the country, her longitudinal educational path follows her. And we can talk about that particular Maria Gutierrez in that particular city in that particular state. And that would be that would allow us to deliver so much value to the market.
Trick, I think the thing I would ask of an educational leader who's positioned to kind of make those policy or procurement requirements, like Jason and Jeff talked about, is be outcomes focused. Because if you can get clear and crisp on what is that end state that you seek for your learners, and leave the solutioning to the solution providers, right? These ed tech providers have a lot of expertise in that very thing, like taking a market problem and designing and building and implementing a product solution for that problem. They can position vendors to be super successful in delivering right-sized tools and products that are just what learners and educators need. And so thinking of, like, in Texas, House Bill 3 is a super example. It's a college and career and military readiness outcomes kind of bonus-based system, which says if you can move the needle on delivering more college-ready students and proving it with this data, like ACT data or College Board data, they call it TSI there, but it's just those assessment providers that allow for them to understand how kids are progressing towards college readiness, along with some other programmatic data. If you can show that you're progressing your student body towards that, you can unlock more funding in order to grow those programs even more and reach even more students. So there's a natural incentive built in to do the right thing. And solution providers and educational service agencies have come in and designed solutions that are really effective for the districts to be able to do that, to tool it up, right? But it starts with like a very mindfully, thoughtfully done, outcomes-based policy environment. That's
Great.
what I would ask for.
Great. Well, you guys are wonderful. And like I said, I could talk about this for a long time, and I hope I have the chance to bring you back and continue this at some point. Of course, I will try to summarize very quickly, and I'll give you a chance when I'm done to tell me what I missed. But when we started talking about interoperability, and there's lots of kinds. It's not just data, but it's content and it's point to point. And while there's lots of different kinds, they really all are interconnected. Interoperability is a very comprehensive statement because they're all tied together. We talk about transparency, and there are various levels of that, but it's really important and required. And the more there is, the better it is for everybody, because it allows good decisions today and it allows for good evolution of processes. and changes, because once you have the transparency, you have a much better chance of understanding what works and doesn't work. Standards are clearly an accelerator in this, and market demand, particularly impact on student outcomes, is a real requirement. I also heard in here that there has to be an ongoing kind of reevaluation of this. This is not a static end game. We're going to get somewhere and we're going to iterate. We have to iterate in order to continuously improve it. And while that's not sexy, it's not something that's fun and great to talk about and jump up and down and get the spotlight on. It really is a requirement in order to make the best use of it. And I had also heard a lot about incentivizing collaboration. And what I'm hearing here is we're better together. And when we can work together and reward success and tie this to the outcomes that we're looking for, the rising tide floats all boats. And so a little bit of investment and a little bit of risk, saying, I'm not going to give away all my secret sauce, but by working with these guys, I'm not hurting myself. I'm actually helping everybody in total. I think that's an attitude that's really going to pay off in spades. What did I miss?
Better than AI.
Yeah, right.
Great job, Pastor.
Don't I wish. Well, you guys have been absolutely wonderful. 3 of my favorite people, and I hope I get the chance to talk again with you real soon. So thanks for joining us today. Everybody, I hope you join us again next time. Thanks so much. Bye-bye for now.
Thank you for listening. ClassLink is proud to be the meeting place to facilitate these conversations. If you have a topic idea, send it to perspectives@classlink.com. To keep hearing our perspectives, be sure to follow us on Apple and Spotify and subscribe to us on YouTube.